Hey folks, so Shiloh and I are going to experiment with something which is going to be our point five episodes. We're going to be providing a little bit of education during these brief episodes so that people that aren't intimately familiar with mental health terminology can get up to speed. One of the things that we're going to be referring to a lot is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our big book of diagnosis that we use in this field. So to get you ready for this week's episode on Scott Peterson, and this will also prepare you for future episodes, we want to talk about antisocial personality disorder. Uh, so antisocial personality disorder is a really fixed and chronic pattern of disregard for the rights of others and an ease in violating the rights of others. And the diagnostic manual looks at it as if the start of those symptoms or those behaviors are around age 15. Um, so I'm just going to read some of the things to you from the DSM. One is failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors is indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So that's not going to hit everybody, right, Shiloh?
No, I
Because
mean
some people are going to, like some of the most successful sociopaths or CEOs that,
that don't ever have any crossings with the law or the criminal justice system.
right,
Sure. Deceitfulness is definitely going to be one of the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So this is a lot of what we're going to be talking about in upcoming episodes. Repeated lying, conning others, basically using any means necessary to get their needs met above anyone else's.
right. So let's see what's next. Impulsivity. So the failure to plan ahead. This one is a little bit of a, I feel like is a little bit wonky because you're going to hear stories from us of a lot of sociopaths that are quite capable
Oh, lots of planning.
of planning ahead.
Sure.
So that one I think there's a little bit of more sort of the lower socioeconomic person that ends up in prison, maybe maybe the not so smart criminal,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So irritability, aggressiveness, inability to sort of tolerate any distress, and the result is getting into numerous fights or assaults.
So, with all this being said, there's, again, going back to their own needs being met and not caring so much for the needs or safety of others, there is this reckless disregard for the well being of other people in general. And so that can mean safety wise or just their emotional well being and a lack of caring for them.
Okay. And irresponsibility, repeated failures to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. One of the things that you find in this diagnosis is a really static work history. It's not surprising to find sociopaths who are excellent liars, excellent at deceit, obtaining very prestigious positions in the community or very prestigious positions at work, but they rarely last.
Right. The manipulation is the con to get into it.
Right, but then they don't have the ability to sustain the manipulation in order to keep it going. Now, obviously, this is a generalization because, as we'll talk about, some very famous people that exhibit, at least if not full blown, at least strong flavors of antisocial personality disorder, like Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff
Right.
ran that scam for years and was highly aware of what he was doing. Let's see.
I would say the last one and probably the most obvious that you hear with this is lack of remorse.
Yeah, lack of remorse.
Which we've sort of touched on with the other criteria, but really they're just, there's no bad feelings about what they have done to other people.
Except in as much as, for some, the consequences of actions. So, not saying that this individual is not able to learn or understand that actions have consequences, but that cannot be mistaken for actual empathy. Although what we'll find, and I will talk about this later on in my experience working in the correctional settings, is that long-term criminals who have been exposed to um, therapy speak or terms, and they've got nothing better to do but to study it, become excellent mimics of real human emotion
Sure.
when it's not something they're actually capable of feeling. What's the saying? It's oh gosh, they know the lyrics but they can't hum the tune, something like that. I think it's kind of poetic the way
it
that's
is.
put.
And that's going to be even more true for psychopaths, and when they are identified in treatment, oftentimes the recommendation is no treatment because they're just learning from you how they should be acting, what they should be saying, and
it can make them better criminals.
Yeah, there isn't any real treatment progress happening.
Obviously, we're going to be talking about some real life ASPDs, but for just immediate references, Tony Soprano of The Sopranos is a great example of someone who was probably made into a sociopath, from his involvement in crime from such an early age. We do show, I think, at the beginning of the series, he is shown as having panic disorder. So it's not that they can't have a range of physiological responses that neuronormative people do.
Right.
But the actual empathy is not there. Who else? Don Draper from Mad Men is another great example of a very successful sociopath who manipulates his way through relationships and through work.
And lived a double life?
Oh, right? Yeah, perfect example of somebody who lived a double life.
Sure. Okay.
So that's a little bit of a prep. Were you going to do more?
Well, I haven't even talked about psychopathy.
No.
You just went into antisocial personality disorder. So let's just address the issue of using the term psychopath versus sociopath, because there's other podcasts out there where this gets interchanged. Not just other podcasts, just life and people.
Well, in our profession,
talking about it professionally debate, right? Or casually. So these are both terms that are used clinically. They're used informally. But they're generally used to describe somebody who has a lot of different personality traits as well as behavioral traits, where it seems like they are doing things that someone who we can only understand as being crazy or insane to be doing, yet they don't appear that way. If you want to say that this is antisocial personality disorder to the nth degree or magnified, that's generally how we like to think about it. Somebody who meets that diagnosis for antisocial personality disorder doesn't necessarily mean they would rise to the level of psychopath or sociopath, but the reverse would be true. Psychopath was the original term used, again, to describe individuals, as I just said, that they have maybe engaged in some really horrific behaviors, but they seem to not be crazy or insane, yet are able to do some really horrific things. Psychopath was the first term used about 100 years ago, and then when we came into more modern times with social learning theory in the 60s with, Albert Bandura and the Bobo doll and looking at how we model behavior for other people, terms of the social learning movement became more popular, and that's when sociopath became used more than psychopath. And then early 80s is when Dr. Robert Hare developed the psychopathy checklist. And so we actually had an assessment tool that we could see whether or not somebody was scoring high on traits that psychopaths had. And I think with the formalization of an assessment, that really solidified the term psychopath over sociopath, which was a little bit more short-lived. Since I came into psychology in the 2000s, I guess graduate school, 2000s, that's just the term that I was always familiar with. And having a heavy assessment background and being trained in the psychopathy checklist, that has just always been the term that I lean towards.
And we should also point out that, and it's so ironic because I've just now gotten into Mindhunter, which is a great series that's on Netflix right now, really beautifully done. We'll go into a little bit more, but they gave me a little history lesson that I had forgotten about the origins of psychology from, because they talk about this in a lecture of Enrico Ferri from about the mid 1800s, 1856. He was the one to first come up with the 5 classifications of criminals. This was somebody
Right.
who wanted to distinctly put a difference between the different types of criminals. So he had the criminal madman, the born criminal, the habitual criminal, the occasional criminal, and then the criminal of passion. And those are pretty self-explanatory, right? A crime
Sure.
of passion is like your one-time, like it's every episode of Snapped,
Yes.
basically,
Yes.
right? The occasional criminal is somebody that maybe, on the light end would be what, like a shoplifter, somebody that just wants to burn off some emotional energy, so they do little minor criminals, or they take advantage of situations when they're there.
Right.
The habitual criminal, who is like a career criminal, and is, there's a lot of factors that could be involved in that. The born criminal, which is something that we are really interested in, which is like looking at people that are just wired differently from birth, and not necessarily the criminal that is made from, environment. So this doesn't necessarily hold up in the 21st century.
No, not at
but
all.
it's a really cool to think that they were thinking about this at that time.
Absolutely. And so the most current research we have with psychopaths, and there's a lot of lab studies that have been done with psychopaths. If you're interested in more of this in depth, definitely go buy the book Without Conscience from Robert Hare, the developer of the assessment tool.
Oh, and The Sociopath Next Door. Did you read that one? It's a really quick read.
May have.
Dr. Martha Stout, I believe is her name, and it's
Okay.
you guys. It's
We'll
a great
check on
book.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the most current research is stating that it's basically a combination of some biological factors at birth. There's an aggressive or aggression gene that they have been able to map, as well as something going on in the brain where there are these biological before birth type factors that are present with them.
Or are they saying strictly genetic?
One marker is genetic, and then something else is chemical in the brain, and then put that with most often the third environmental factor of very severe abuse in childhood.
Okay, so that seems to be important. Like maybe that's the trigger.
Yeah, sure.
For something happening.
Sure.
But
because you could have the other 2 biological factors and be fine, and there are people out there that have them and don't have the abuse and
just live normal lives.
So
since I'm not up on this particular research that you're reading, is it any kind of is there a structural component to it? Like, is it related to the amygdala or?
Yes, I believe so. I know a neuropsychologist or neuroscientist was the one doing a lot of the leading research on it. And I believe there are areas they're able to pinpoint that are lighting up in certain situations that necessarily wouldn't for non-psychopaths.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So interestingly, psychopathy is not a formal diagnosis. So it's not in our DSM. It's not a diagnosis that you can necessarily label somebody with, even though we kind of toss the term around. But generally, anyone that would score high on the assessment tool is somebody that we would say has these psychopathy traits. So if they have a high enough score, then generally we would say, okay, this person is a psychopath. And that's how we identify them for purposes of study and for doing research. So essentially the psychopathy checklist assessment, which I happen to have one with me right now, has 2 factors. So these are the 2 areas where we look at different traits with individuals. And the first factor is looking at sort of their interpersonal relationships with people and how they present. And then the other factor is looking at their behaviors.
Okay. So
you can imagine that the criminal that would score high, we're looking at their behaviors of things they're doing. There's probably related to crime. Pathological lying, parasitic lifestyle, which is
okay.
huge.
Yeah.
I think when I listen to Dirty John, parasitic lifestyle sticks out to me as like the number one red
Right.
flag. Just literally feeding. Okay, not literally. I need to stop using that term. Overusing that term.
You literally need to stop using
I
that.
literally need to stop doing that. It's just really feeding off of other people to sustain their own life and doing it by whatever means, and usually illegally and immorally and all of the above. But just being really impulsive, being pretty versatile in the different types of crimes they get involved with, whether it's financial crimes to sort of, stay afloat and sustain themselves, or if it's crimes against other people because they're acting out. Usually they have some sort of juvenile criminal history or delinquency. So this started clearly very young. But those are the most obvious ones, I think, that are really easy to look at and say, oh, okay, I don't even have to talk to this person. I can just look at a criminal record and sort of tick these things off. But the first factor that goes back to the more personal, or interpersonal, affective presentation for someone is how they talk to people and how they appear. And so that's going to be your conning, manipulative.
So charming, like really sort of feeling you out, feeling their victim out, trying to find a hook, right?
Yes. How can they be a chameleon to change to what they need to get from you?
Right.
Whether that is charming, whether it's just not showing a lot of emotion. Again, going back to some of the...
Which leaves a blank slate, right? So if they're just leaving a blank slate, then somebody who is perhaps in a bad place in their life, or is a characterologically needy person, or has characterological issues, that person then may interpret that blank slate as being more interested, more compassionate, more caring than they actually are.
They fill it in.
Right. They're filling in the void.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of times we get also this grandiose sense of self.
Yeah.
So whether it's part of their lies, I remember very distinctly in my training that Donald Trump was used as this specific item.
No.
Weird,
Don't
right?
get political.
Weird. But when everything's wonderful and amazing and everything you've done is just at the top of your game, that's your...
Okay, so you bring up something very interesting without going too far into the political realm, but that is another important point I want to make, is that in this particular constellation of behaviors and inner workings, there's not really a middle ground, right? Like, so everything is great or it's awful.
Correct.
Right? So the way they're presenting, they're putting a spotlight on their victims. You are the best, you're the best, you're the best. But if their victim doesn't reflect back,
right,
sort of that narcissistic extension, then they flip on them, and you're the worst, you're scum, you're terrible, and now, since you're not what I need you to be, I'm going to threaten you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Completely all or nothing type thinking.
Yeah.
So we hope this has been helpful just in kind of dissecting some of these terms, letting you know that probably from here on out we're going to use the term psychopathy and psychopath when we are referring to these folks. But we just thought it would be a nice little setup for our next episode, which is going to be about leading double lives. So thank you so much for joining us for a short mini episode, and we'll see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.